the last two speakers, Ghana Think Tank and Esther Pierden, will engage in a conversation around global hauntings, and we've specifically thought about that title to pull their works together. Esther is Deputy Director for the Center for Globalization Studies at the University of Amsterdam, and when we first met, we met around the theme of hauntings, and its afterlife. And one of the interesting things about her work, it ties together some of the conversations that have been happening in the earlier two presentations as about absences and visibility and invisibility. And in one of her recent projects, I hope I don't misquote, she thinks about this question of the ghost, the ghostly figure, the ghostly presence, mapped onto how we even think about people in Europe today and how Europe has its ghosts happening now. And we've been in an ongoing conversation around whether ethnographic museums and their collections can also be thought of as ghostly presence that haunt or present. Similarly, in another, the reason why we thought of global hauntings to include the work of Ghana Think Tank, John and Chris, was in a way to think through the afterlife of something, a practice that is so embedded in the colonial, but sometimes we forget the afterlife of the development project. And one of the first questions, which is a confronting question that when I met them first, and they asked me, what is your problem? Which is something that, you know, when you're on the American side of the world, you start looking, what do you mean, what is my problem? And they were going to try and solve the problems of the world, but but reshifting the framework and the parameters or the geographies of problem solving. And for us here at this museum, and many people will not know this, the Tropa Museum, for example, was from the end of the 1940s to the 80s, actually the showpiece for Dutch development practice. So we actually have a lot of collections that emerge out of this link between an older colonial practice, so the transition from the colonial to development. And that narrative still is embedded, and it's something that we want to uncover. So we are pleased to invite these 2-3 speakers to engage in a conversation about the afterlife of the global, but in another, or the afterlife of the colonial, I would say, but and looking at it in terms of the global.
Thank you. I'm John Ewing, and this is Christopher Robbins, and there's a third member of our collective, actually Carmen Montoya, who couldn't make it. But we've been a collective for about 9 years, and so we have a certain framework we work with, and then each project we do is special to that space. So we'll start by contextualizing the project and then talk specifically about what we did here in Leiden. So the mission of the Ghana Think Tank is to develop the first world. We collect problems in the so-called developed world and then send them to be solved by think tanks that we established in Iran, in Cuba, in Ghana, El Salvador, Palestine, and a group of incarcerated teenage girls in the US prison system. Now we asked these groups to analyze our problems and then send us back solutions. And then we implement those solutions, whether they strike us as brilliant or absurd. Now during the course of the project, we have collected hundreds of problems, maybe thousands. And we've received back almost as many solutions. So the way we go about gathering the problems is we set up these video collection booths. And we do self-addressed postcards people can send back to us. We do on-the-street interviews. And then we send those problems to our think tanks, who give us their take on them.
Right from the beginning, and I implement this kind of teachings to the kids. When I'm going to come down, I can tell me, and be coming away by Nature, when she let me, now make a be here. No one be coming away, I'm feeling, I'm a German, I'm a characters be, no lemon label.
Pienso que una de las cosas que más admiro de Estados Unidos, de la cultura de Estados Unidos, que le apuesta muchísimo a la educación, a que sus hijos terminen la educación básica, se vayan a la universidad, porque siento que de una forma mantener el sistema de dominio a nivel mundial. pero siento que le faltaría la otra parte, la parte humana, en valorar al resto de la gente que habita este mundo.
Pues, y eso yo lo he visto con, por ejemplo, en los Estados Unidos con los afroamericanos, ellos sí respetan a sus viejos, ¿eh? Sí. O sea, su abuela, eso sí lo respetan. Y los latinos lo hacen, y los asiáticos lo hacen. Aquí en Westport el problema es que la mayoría son blancos.
So as a way of bringing these voices to a broader audience, we build these installations where people can submit problems, they can watch video of the think tanks, and sign up to get involved in implementing the solutions. This is one in Germany. Here's related in China. And we also started to create these mobile galleries to bring the entire experience into the street. This is a trailer we created that we bring around New York City to collect problems and then come back for implementing solutions and showing the videos of the think tanks discussing them. This is a solar-powered media center pulled by a donkey for collecting Moroccan solutions to American problems in rural Morocco. And this one runs on a bicycle that we built for work with African refugees seeking asylum in Israel. So now I'm going to walk us through a few examples of us putting the think tank solutions into action. This is Westport, Connecticut, one of the wealthiest towns in the United States. A problem we kept running into there was lack of diversity. We are all white and wealthy, they complained. The think tank in El Salvador responded that they probably were actually a lot more diverse than they realized. They just weren't counting certain people. Who's fixing your house? Who's tending your yard? I bet they don't look like you. Their solution was for us to hire there we go, good. Their solution was for us to hire immigrant day laborers to attend Westport social functions, which we did for $15 an hour cash, the same as their day laborer work. Now, as Ghana Think Tank is developed, we've started to realize that it can be used as a tool to create some really unlikely partnerships. So we've started to expand the scope. This is Mitrovica. This is the main bridge in Mitrovica, which is a violently divided town in former Yugoslavia. The Serb population and the Albanian population in this town are separated from each other by a river and protected from each other by these international troops on the bridge between them. We applied the Ghana Think Tank process differently here, asking the Serbs and Albanians to solve each other's problems from across that river. And after 10 days of the process, a group of Serbs and Albanians who had not crossed that bridge since the war between them ended in 1999 came across to work directly with the other side for this project. Essentially, they kicked us out of our own project. Why are you here, they asked us. Shouldn't we be talking to them? And we realized this was actually a far greater success than anything we had planned to do while we were there. So giving up control started to become a goal for us. The Mitrovica project forced us to bring our work back into the world it was supposedly critiquing, to see if it could be relevant to peace building or development.
So we asked ourselves, how can we apply this to a conflict in our own country in the US? And we decided to focus on immigration. And we've embarked on a 3-year project to do just that. We've been collecting problems from civilian border patrols and vigilantes like the Minutemen, and bringing them to think tanks of undocumented workers in San Diego and recently deported immigrants in Tijuana to be solved. And after the uproar against the busloads of unaccompanied children entering the USA, we reached out to those angry Americans who had met them at the border and turned them back. Then we brought their problems to the deported children for help. And at this stage in the project, we have collected problems and solutions from the think tanks and are beginning to strategize with the Minutemen groups how to implement the solutions given by the immigrant think tanks.
So I'll go through one example from this ongoing project. This one started with a problem submitted by this man, shown here burning the Mexican flag in a counter-protest to an immigrant rights rally. He spoke of how his income suffered because of immigrant labor. You can see here, 20 years ago, I made $16 to $20 an hour for construction work. Now they pay us $10 for the same work and they hire illegals. But as we continued the back and forth, his tone began to change. He was talking about they can't live on that salary either. You've seen how they live. So they get nothing and we lose what we used to have. And as we continued further, he started to focus on the boss, the person who was taking advantage of him and the illegals. Like he said, like the international bankers, their job is to fleece the people. The think tanks in Mexico seem to complete his sentence with their solutions. Immigrant and American workers share in being exploited. We need to create a union of legal and illegal workers. We need to get together and demand a raise. So they're saying the same thing. These are two groups of people we chose to work with specifically because they are so adamantly opposed. But it turns out what they share is basically being dehumanized by exploitative companies.
So in the midst of this work along our own border, we were invited to work on a related project in Israel with a group of Sudanese refugees who, in a seemingly ironic twist, were being detained in an Israeli internment camp while seeking asylum from genocide in their own country. Of the nearly 5,000 African refugees who have entered Israel seeking asylum in the past 5 years, all but 4, that's 0.7%, have been placed in a state of seemingly permanent limbo.
0.07%.
0.07%. Not permitted to work or rent in Tel Aviv and often incarcerated in an open desert prison. And when this prison was deemed unconstitutional and in violation of Geneva Accords, by the Israeli Supreme Court, a constitutional amendment called the Infiltrator Law was pushed through to permit the refugees continued detainment. So we met with a group of these refugees to help solve the problems of Tel Aviv residents, many of who believed the Africans should be expelled. Some of the solutions they came up with included an all-women African and Israeli community watch in South Tel Aviv, for which we designed these uniforms. Another solution was a network of small urban gardens built through farming Skillshare between African and Israeli residents. And Tel Aviv tours from a refugee's perspective and a visual guide to cultural misunderstandings between African refugees and Israeli residents. But just as important were the conversations that took place between Tel Aviv residents and the African refugees, exploring painful parallels regarding racism and genocide, cultural difference, and ghettoization.
If there's anyone in the world that knows how it feels to be a refugee, it's the Jewish people. So I think that the problem that they're identifying is kind of off, because it's not that you're not being understood.
You run and you come to my land now, and I feel sorry. I need to feel sorry for you because you think I don't understand you. It's actually the opposite. I'm very angry about you think that I don't understand you. I really understand you, but in my opinion, in my instinct, you're going the wrong way. This is the reason you suffer. We had to choose to run or to fight. We fought. They have to choose to fight or run. They run.
We don't know the inner politics of each country in Africa. Let's say leave it. But let's say that, for example, the Germans, the Jewish Germans, they didn't. They
were Germans.
We'll be Jews in our house and Germans when we go out. They were German, and they felt, and a lot of Jews died because they didn't want to leave their homeland. It was their homeland.
It's also
it was a problem. They should have ran away.
Maybe,
but
we read about the Jewish history, and we know that they have been suffering a lot to create their own country. We are supporting them.
Okay.
Just the only problem we are here is just we are looking for a refuge for a while, and then we will go back. We are not here to integrate, forever with them here, and we will like to destroy the Jewish community.
So that brings us to Leiden, where we also ended up with some very uncomfortable parallels regarding racism, immigrants, and ethnic conflict. We spent a week moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, asking people to donate their problems. And the biggest problem we received by far was, we have no problems here. This was followed with, who are we to send our little problems to people in these countries who are so much worse off than the Netherlands? But we persisted and found some Leideners willing to share their problems, and managed to collect close to 100 problems, including aggressive seagulls are attacking our cats, our dogs, even small children. But one problem that kept popping up in various forums was that people were worried about growing intolerance, especially towards Muslims. And Muslim residents spoke of the prejudices they were encountering. This in the city known for freedom, in a country known for tolerance. I think I forgot to talk about the point, while we were here, the Charlie Hebdo attacks happened, and that obviously colored the entire experience very specifically. So we sent those problems to our think tanks, this time in Indonesia, in Ghana. The Sudanese refugees are currently detained in the Hola detention camp in Israel.
All these are part of videos in the show, so when we go there, you can see.
And think tanks in Morocco and the Gaza Strip.
So they told us to look to Islam and to look to Dutch history. And after researching Dutch history, we discovered many links between the birth of the new Dutch Republic as a nation of tolerance and the Islamic world. William of Orange's arrangements with Suleiman the Magnificent, the partisan Gozen adopting a Muslim crescent moon during their relief of the siege of Leiden, and Joseph Nassi, a prominent Jewish diplomat, being the glue between William of Orange and the Ottoman Empire. And based on the solutions from the think tanks, many of whom are Muslim, and our historical research, it became clear that one way for the Dutch to overcome growing intolerance was to reestablish their connections to Islam.
So when we looked for a Dutch institution that could facilitate a better relationship with Islam, the Anne Frank Museum stuck out as the primary institution today in the Netherlands that teaches the importance of tolerance and the dangers when intolerance goes unchecked. Part of the mission of the Anne Frank Museum is to bring Anne Frank's life story to the attention of people all over the world, to encourage them to reflect on the dangers of anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination, and the importance of freedom, equal rights, and democracy. And so a monument to the Dutch was born, a combination of two institutions dedicated to teaching tolerance, the Anne Frank Museum and an Islamic prayer room. Okay, so we're asking some difficult questions here, and it's clearly not just directed at the Dutch. Can Islam teach us about tolerance, or are we haunted by the specter of Muslim extremists?
After all, in William of Orange's time, Christianity was clearly the most violent and intolerant religion. So why isn't that history and the historical ties to Islamic religious tolerance more commonly known?
Also, is the Anne Frank House actually a monument to tolerance, or is it really a reminder of the betrayal and the violence she experienced at the hands of the Dutch?
And can Islamic prayer room be in alignment with the goals of Anne Frank House? And finally, in which direction do we currently find ourselves headed? Thank you.
Thanks.